The big breaking news coming in this hour. Qatar has decided to take on the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC. The Gulf nation, which has been engaged in a long-standing dispute with Saudi Arabia, has decided to leave OPEC by January 2019. The country's energy minister said that the decision was taken as part of a long-term strategy to enhance the country's role internationally. Qatar has the third largest gas reserves in the world. The breaking news is coming in this hour. The Qatar has decided to take on the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC. The Gulf nation, which has been engaged in a long-standing dispute with Saudi Arabia, has decided to leave OPEC by January 2019. The country's energy minister said that today the decision was taken as part of the long-term strategy to enhance the country's role internationally. Qatar has the third largest gas reserves in the world. So this is a big development which has taken place, that the Qatar is exiting OPEC. And though the reasons have not been specified, but Qatar's leaving OPEC is a big blow to the platform because it's an important player there with large gas reserves. Qatar and Saudi Arabia had been loggerheads on the issue of security, terrorism, Al-Qaeda, and the way West Asia should be run. So that way, Qatar as a country had been loggerheads with Saudi Arabia, and it became even more acute after Mohammed bin Salman came to power. I'm joined by my colleague Krishna Kumar from Newsroom. Krishna, tell me, how does Qatar benefit by exiting OPEC? I think there's a bit of an audio problem with my colleague Krishna from the newsroom. We'll go back to him because it's a very important news which is emanating from West Asia. And the news is that the Qatar will leave OPEC by January. Now, why has this decision been announced now? Why has it happened? How will Qatar benefit? Will it impact Saudi Arabia? How will Saudi Arabia respond to it? Will it affect the OPEC production? What will be the different bilateral trade arrangements to which Qatar would engage with the rest of the world? You know, these are broader questions which needs answering, because Saudi Arabia in past wanted to build a canal through Qatar and cutting the peninsula from the whole West Asian body mass by dredging a canal. So, you know, these are issues which are on plate. And what bearing this issue will have on India in terms of oil security, petrol or diesel security, which is petroleum products. You know, these are the issues which the Qatar will have to respond. So going back to Krishna, tell me, how does Qatar benefit and what prompted this?
Right, Karthikeya, a big piece of news, as you're rightly pointing out. You know, so much at play when it comes to OPEC. OPEC is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. It's OPEC. It's 15 countries put together that control over half of the world's oil production, out of which Qatar will not be a part of it anymore. That's the biggest breaking news we are tracking at this point in time. That's because it is exiting the OPEC. It's come from the energy minister straight from Qatar. It's confirmed. Keep in mind, Qatar has been part of OPEC since the year 1961, Karthikeya. This was not an expected development. This is not something that was on the cards or anything. This has got to do with whether Qatar agrees with the overall decision of the OPEC to have production cuts, because OPEC is set to meet in Vienna on the 6th of December and take calls on production cuts to sort of hold the prices. And I think the problem here is that Qatar is not in agreement with that overarching narrative to cut production, because it has made it clear that it wants to continue building its production of gas from about 77 million tons a year to 110 million tons a year. And as you've been rightly pointing out, it is the largest LNG producer, liquefied natural gas producer in the world. And Qatar essentially is saying that they will abide by all the commitments that they have so far, but not the commitments that they've made to OPEC members. So that is what is happening right now. Qatar is, in a sense, set to be. This is what they're saying.
Christian, just hold your thought for a minute. I'm also joined by Mr. Daniel Al-Kaabi from International Economist on phone. So my first question to you is, in your opinion, what prompted Qatar to take this sudden decision?
Yes, well, I think that it's a very, very important development, because we have been seeing a gradual breakup of OPEC since the factions of that followed Saudi Arabia and the parts that followed Iran have been in dispute for quite some time. And what I think is that this shows that there have been cracks in OPEC for a long time, that Qatar knows that keeping the production cuts is damaging the reputation of OPEC, and more importantly, that adding Russia, who is a very big competitor of Qatar in LNG, in gas, in the regional gas market, has been something that Qatar has never agreed with. So one of the things that I think that will happen is that it is very likely that we see other countries join Qatar in a position that is against this ongoing production cuts that have been extremely negative for the position of OPEC vis-a-vis their customers.
Right. Daniel Lakal, this is Krishna Kumar joining in to this broadcast. I wanted to ask you, some say that this is not exactly something that was on the cards or it was expected. Yes, there was a gradual breakup of the OPEC, but Qatar has been a part of OPEC since the year 1961, and now it is saying it won't be a part of it come next year.
Yeah. No, it is absolutely something that wasn't in the cards. Nobody expected a long-term and very valuable member of OPEC to decide to leave. But it is also true that the disagreements with Saudi Arabia and that the disagreements with all other members of OPEC like Iran have led Qatar to have a distinctively different position relative to production, relative to the role of what OPEC should be. And obviously it's a tremendous development. It's a major crisis in OPEC.
And how do you see this crisis affecting oil prices? They've been, on a bit of a seesaw, because you've seen them recovering post the, breaking the ice of the trade war between US and China. But in the meanwhile, pressure has been building on prices in the lead up to the OPEC meeting on the 6th of December in Vienna.
In my opinion, what it will do is definitely continue to erode the geopolitical risk attached to the oil price. If we look at what has been happening in the last years, the geopolitical premium that oil prices tended to have due to the manipulation of supply by the main producers, by OPEC, that definitely is coming down. And if anything, what this will do, let alone the small changes today or in the next couple of days, is to reduce further that geopolitical premium. So my opinion is that Qatar will be a driving force in the diversification of supply, and definitely that the position of other countries is likely to be similar to that of Qatar.
And then, do you see more breakaways from the OPEC following Qatar?
It is not unlikely that we see in the future a couple of other countries that have voiced their discontent with this ongoing policy of cutting production for no reason, as let's say, as the driver of more countries leaving OPEC.
Right, and if I were to ask you, how do you think this decision to leave OPEC, because Qatar is already under sanctions from 4 other Gulf states, and now it's taken this bold decision to exit OPEC, how do you see this rubbing off on, say, geopolitical tensions that have been simmering between Qatar and other Gulf countries?
Well, definitely it is a consequence of the rising tensions with some of the other OPEC members, particularly with Saudi Arabia. I think that this is the reason. Obviously, we all know that the biggest driver of the decisions of production in OPEC is currently Saudi Arabia. So clearly, the positions of Qatar are to separate themselves from a cartel in which Saudi Arabia continues to lead.
Right. Daniel Lakal joining us from London for this big breaking story. Daniel, I want to ask you, there's so much to discuss because this is, in a sense, unprecedented in the scheme of, production of crude oil in the world. Qatar, one of the oldest members of OPEC, is set to leave the bloc. It has reiterated that it will, stick to its commitments, just not the commitments to OPEC. And more importantly, it has stressed upon how it wants to expand its production of natural gas or liquefied natural gas, which is already the largest producer. It wants to increase it from 77 million tons a year to 110 million tons a year.
Yes, absolutely. And this is clear. One of the reasons why Qatar is doing this is because they acknowledge that the process of decarbonization of the consumer countries that have adhered to the Paris Agreement, the climate change agreement, is going to be a major driver of growth in demand developing in LNG, in natural gas. So one of the key components of their decision is that they want to be sort of the Saudi Arabia of gas, which is going to be in the next years one of the pillars of the decarbonization of the main consumer nations.
Right. Daniel, stay with us. We have the statement of Qatar. It says, let me read it out for all those watching this. The withdrawal decision reflects Qatar's desire to focus its efforts on plans to develop and increase its natural gas production from 77 million tons per year to 110 million tons per year. That's Saad Sherida Al-Kaabi, Qatar's energy minister, also saying that Qatar has worked diligently during the past few years to develop a future strategy based on growth and expansion.
Yes, and that's what I was saying, is that Qatar knows that probably crude oil is going to be reducing its importance in the energy mix in the main consumer nations in the next 15, 20 years, while natural gas is going to increase its position and its importance in the energy mix. As such, for them, it makes no sense to stay in OPEC and adhere to reductions of production of crude oil when what they want to do is to become the driving force of growth in supply of natural gas to the Western world.
Daniel Lakal, economist, joining us live on the phone line from London. Thank you so much, Daniel. Big development, Kartikeya, as you rightly hit the nail on the head before giving it to me. This has got huge geopolitical ramifications. This is Qatar, which is already under the eye of 4 Gulf states, that's now taken this big, bold decision, Kartikeya. Nobody expected it. This was not, there was talks about rifts in OPEC, and that happens all the time. But Qatar, one of the most important fixtures of the OPEC since the 1961, has chosen to leave, and the decision is based on its own self-interest. It's just like a sort of a Qatar-first policy, more than anything else, Kartikeya.
And more than that, one has to also see it in the context of the way the Saudi Crown Prince had built pressure on Qatar, the way Qatar is an important base for America, the way Turkey is interested in opening up a base in Qatar. Qatar has taken position which runs contrary to the Saudi regime. Most of the talks between America and Taliban took place in Qatar. So that way, Qatar has been an independent player in the Saudi Peninsula, and perhaps the economic decision also has a lot of political, I would say, pull and push around it for to be formed and to be articulated in this way in which they are leaving OPEC. But nonetheless, it's not a small story. It's not going to die away. There will be political ramification, and we will have to wait and see how will Mohammed bin Salman react to it.